Michael Kogan's family fled the Ukraine during the Russian Revolution, and he'd grown up in and around Asia. First Manchuria, then moving to Tokyo, where he spent World War II studying at the Waseda School of Economics. In 1944, he graduated and moved to Shanghai, where he established a company selling human hair wigs and floor coverings. After the Communist Revolution, he moved back to Tokyo to reincorporate as a clothing distributor and opened Japan's first vodka distillery as Taito Trading Company. The distillery was quickly abandoned as Kogan saw more profit in importing peanuts and perfume vending machines and in refurbishing old jukeboxes purchased from American military bases. By 1960, the jukebox operation was the main part of his business as official distributor of several companies, and he decided to branch out into electromechanical arcade games. Rosen Enterprises had recently opened Japan's first arcade in Tokyo. You'll remember Rosen from our video on the early history of Sega. Shooting games were taking the country by storm, and Taito opened a large gun corner in Osaka with over 40 gun games and pinball tables. Rosen responded by opening their own Osaka location, Umeda Gun Corner, and the competition really started heating up when Taito scored the role of official Japanese distributor for pinball manufacturer Gottlieb. In 1963, Taito decided to go all in on coin-op machines, creating the subsidiary Pacific Amusements Limited to develop and manufacture original games. Among their successes was the Crown 602, the first Japanese crane machine, creating a staple for game centers for decades to come. Taito inspired dozens of other small companies to set up their own manufacturing operations, shifting the Japanese industry from an import focus to innovation. By the end of the decade, Japanese electromechanical games from Taito, Sega, Nakamura, and Costco had reshaped the entire novelty game market. However, American companies like Midway and Allied Leisure were able to clone Japanese innovations competently enough that they effectively pushed these manufacturers out of the US market. After the release of Pong, the new video games were slow to penetrate Japanese markets. Taito imported the cabinet, but, as with Midway had before them, management felt the game was too simple and they didn't even bother running a test market. Sega, on the other hand, gave it a shot and saw the same kind of success that the American companies had in the US. This inspired Taito to give it another chance, and after seeing similar results, began importing Pong boards to house in their own cabinets, marketed as Elipong in 1973. While Sega set about developing Pong variants like TV Hockey, Taito imported Atari's Space Race to release as Astro Race. When Taito began developing their own video games in late 1973, they also changed the name of the company from Taito Trading Company to Taito Corporation. Their early games were designed by Tomohiro Nishikado. He was a job hopper, moving on from companies that couldn't meet his expectations. He joined Taito's Pacific Amusements Limited division in 1968 because it sounded interesting and he'd heard that the company was desperate for engineers with electronics experience. While he'd been hoping to design new games, Nishikado was first assigned to production, where he learned the basics of coin-op manufacturing by assembling machines for half a year. After this, he was assigned to quality control and then technical, before finally finding a place in development in 1969. At this point, Taito was primarily adapting US arcade concepts for the Japanese market, but Nishikado wanted to create original designs. In 1971, he developed the target shooting game Sky Fighter, which used mirrors to project the images of a model plane against a scrolling film background. The game was a massive success, but its size was also massive, too big to fit in most locations. Despite his performance, management transferred Nishikado to materials procurement, and he strongly considered quitting in frustration. His old boss from development, however, convinced him to start studying TTL circuits in his spare time, because it looked like the future of the arcade market. So, when Taito began importing Pong machines in 1973, Nishikado returned to development because nobody else at Taito, and actually few in the entire Japanese arcade industry, understood integrated circuit technology. Once again, Nishikado wanted to make his own games. He spent half a year dissecting Pong to learn how the machines worked, and developed his own variant, Soccer. This added a second paddle and a goal to each side of the screen. He followed this up with a 4-player variant, Davis Cup. Rectangular paddle games didn't really scratch Nishikado's creative itch, though, and he decided to experiment with human character graphics. TV basketball was the result. Still a ball and paddle game, using dials to move paddles to knock a ball into a basketball hoop, but with paddles shaped like human figures, one of the first depictions of humans in a video game. 1973 also saw the establishment of Taito America, an extension of Taito's import-export business that sold knickknacks to the US and shipped arcade and jukebox machines back to Japan. Taito president Mike Kogan had tapped one of his buyers, Ed Miller, to run the organization. Miller quickly dropped the trinkets and instead reached out to American coin-op companies to license Japanese games to, not only from Taito but from other smaller companies as well. Back to Nishikado. After seeing Atari's Grand Track 10, he decided to make a driving game. The American game was, he felt, too difficult to be enjoyable, so he drew inspiration instead from Casco's electromechanical Mini Drive and an earlier Taito machine Super Road 7. Both games involved driving down an endlessly scrolling road, and Super Road 7 incorporated rival cars to dodge. The result was Speed Race, released in 1974. The game had you controlling a large car in the middle of the screen, moving down a straight path, dodging other cars that would appear at the top. The goal, of course, was to earn points by driving as far as possible in the time allotted. The further you went, the higher up on the screen your car would be, increasing difficulty as you'd have less time to react to oncoming cars. The illusion of movement was provided by an animated background image of a road with pylons along the sides, and by modulating the speed of the other racers based on the speed of the player. Speed Race was the first true racing video game with opponents on the screen, and the first video game to feature vertical scrolling. Due to the expense of the complex hardware, Taito needed to charge 100 yen per play instead of the customary 50. The game was a massive hit despite this, and established 100 yen as the standard game pricing for the decades to come. Back in the US, Midway licensed the game as Wheels, selling 7,000 units, and also released a seated cabinet as Racer for the lounge market. Speed Race was followed up by an entire franchise of sequels, starting with two-player variants Speed Race Twin in Japan and Wheels 2 in the US. You may have noticed that a lot of these early titles were adaptations of earlier electromechanical games. And, when Nishikado wanted to develop a game with animated human characters, he looked to Sega's 1970 game Gunfight. In Gunfight, two players controlled cowboys at either end of a long cabinet full of obstacles. So, 1975's Western Gun featured two blocky cowboy sprites trying to shoot each other while navigating a playfield dotted with rocks and cacti. Players controlled their characters with a joystick with a trigger, and a lever to toggle between 3 different angles for the gun. Whoever scored the most kills in the time limit wins. This is notable for being the first video game depicting violence against a human target, unlike the vehicle in Computer Space and Tank. More important from a historical perspective, though, is that Western Gun was licensed to Midway as Gunfight, and adapted by Dave Nutting of Dave Nutting Associates, brother of Bill Nutting of Nutting Associates, who commissioned the first video arcade game, Computer Space, from Atari founders Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. See how that all comes around? Bill and Dave had huge sibling rivalry issues, and while we're not going to get into that into this video, it is a whole thing. Anyway, Dave had been experimenting with using Intel's microprocessors in pinball machines, and for Gunfight he decided to switch from discrete logic circuits to the new 8080 chip, the first time a video game uses a microprocessor. Midway's version has larger characters and smoother animation and restricts each player to their side of the battlefield. Upon seeing it, Nishikado felt that his own Western Gun was more fun to play, but he was impressed enough with the graphics that he would go on to incorporate microprocessors into all of his future designs, leading up to 1978's Space Invaders, but that's a topic big enough to require its own video. For now, that's Taito's entrance into the video game market.